So good evening, everyone, and welcome to Entrepreneurship 101. It looks like a great crowd tonight, and for those of you who didn't attend last week's lecture with Ian Telfer, it was really fantastic. We know it was a bit early for those that probably hadn't returned from their holidays because school was delayed, but I encourage you to watch it online. It was really inspiring. We're very happy to also give a shout out to some of our webcast watchers around Canada. We have a big group watching from Tech Southeast in New Brunswick, so we're really delighted to have them along with us, enjoying the program from week to week. So tonight we are talking about market research and sort of identifying your market. And we have two speakers, which is a nice change from our usual sole speaker every week. The first speaker was actually in the video, Usha Srinivasan, who's the program director of the Business Acceleration Program here at Mars. So she leads a market intelligence team that provides market intelligence services to entrepreneurs all across Ontario. For those of you who joined late in the program and weren't here for the intro, sort of as to what Mars does, just briefly, we have advisory services, a major pillar, education, programs like this. But market intelligence is an important pillar of the services that we provide to entrepreneurs in Toronto and around the province. It is free to clients of Mars, so I'm sure for those of you who haven't heard that before, that's really exciting news. Usha worked at Frost & Sullivan before she joined Mars. Frost & Sullivan is a leading global market research and consulting company where she published key research papers, consulted for companies of varying sizes, and managed a group of analysts to provide quality research. She has a technical and industry background in water, the environment, and building technology space, having worked with global clients such as GE, Siemens, IBM, Honeywell, and Brita. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology from the University of Bristol and a PhD in Environmental Sciences from the University of Abertay in Dundee, Scotland. And I'm going to welcome Usha to the stage because she's going to introduce her partner tonight.
Thank you, Carrie. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see a big crowd on a cold January day. It is my privilege to introduce my co-presenter today, Dan Cahoon. I have been told I've been pronouncing his last name wrong all these years that I've known him, but he corrected me today. It's a real true privilege to have him here because he has over 25 years of experience in the market research space, particularly in the customer research area. He's worked for 8 years in Nielsen. And currently he's at Frost & Sullivan, leading the global market research, customer research space. And come on up, Dan. We're going to do a tag teaming here, and hopefully we'll do that well. There might be a little, at some points, that we might lose the flow, but we'll try our best. So in the next, so is this mic on? Do I need to be up here? That's good. Okay, perfect. So I have my clicker here. In the next 40 minutes or so between Dan and I, we want to give you a perspective of why should you care about market and customer information. As you, assuming a lot of you here, obviously, Entrepreneurship 101, you have some idea cooking up in your head and you are thinking about how do I commercialize it? What do I need to think about? So hopefully we'll give you some insight into how to gain that information and how to use it. So let's get started. First things first, you recognize this. It's a simple product life cycle. It's nothing complicated. There's lots of complex steps in each of these, obviously, but essentially when you come up with an idea, you introduce it to a marketplace, there's a growth, spurt, maturity, and decline. So let's think of some products in the digital space at the moment that are in this cycle. Say 3D TV, maybe in the introduction space, right? And then you have other things like Blu-ray and DVR type of things that are maybe in the growth space, mature things, DVD, and some things that are kind of declining The video cassette, nobody uses that anymore. So just to give you a perspective. But today we are going to be really concentrating on the introduction part of it. So when you have an idea in the beginning stages, what are the different things you need to take into consideration before you launch your product? So that's a space we're going to really be thinking about. So why is this important? And this next slide hopefully will demonstrate that. Most of the products that come online or new products that even large corporations bring online are not necessarily successful. So I'm going to let Dan talk about some of those products. You guys are probably familiar with some of these.
Great, thanks, Usha, and welcome everybody. Good evening. As Usha mentioned, I'm a career market research professional, actually about 30 years in the industry, and I've known Usha for 29 of those years, of course. I've done a lot of work for major multinational corporations on the consumer research side, and they spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money on researching new product ideas, who the customer might be, how to price it, how to package it, how to message it, how to communicate the existing of the product, and how to position it in the marketplace to win. But they're not always successful, even though they spend a lot of money on market research and other tools in the marketing toolkit. And these are a couple of examples. Some of them have become a bit of pop culture cliches, and you'll recognize a few of these. Maybe not this one, but this was an effort by Coors to launch a bottled water product. I guess this is an example of not really understanding who your target market is, because clearly their customers were looking for some kind of alcohol content in the product, and once they didn't receive it, they quickly rejected it. This is a very good example that's now become very much part of marketing history, the new Coke debacle, as it's now known. This is another example of a product that was, in fact, this product actually is one of the most researched products ever, to this day. The amount of money that was spent on market research for this product is just absolutely enormous. And I wish I had had a piece of that pie at the time. But what happened was they focused completely on the product formulation, and they forgot about the emotional content of the product and how it interacted and how it connected with their customers. So they did a lot of market research, but they did the wrong kind of market research, if you will. And the rest is history. Probably nobody here other than me and maybe a few other unfortunate people remember this issue, but this was a battle a long time ago, kind of very similar to the Blu-ray battles of maybe just 5 years ago or so ago. Betamax and VHS. There was an actual other format, and it was actually superior to VHS. Betamax, this was fronted by Sony. They invented it. But they failed to win in the marketplace. And they failed to win in the marketplace because they didn't get the content providers on side. So they did a lot of research around what the viewer wants in terms of the product and how they want the product delivered to them. But they failed to get the content providers on side, and VHS did, so they won in the marketplace. And this is another good example. Apple, of course, well known over the past decade of providing products that appear to be winning all the time. But there was a long period in their history in which they were losing quite a bit. And this is one example in which they had a great idea, a little bit ahead of its time, priced poorly, and they didn't really understand who the target market was. And unfortunate circumstances in the marketing world came under scrutiny and under attack from pundits in the popular press who were making jokes about its handwriting recognition capabilities. Again, a little bit too ahead of its time, didn't really understand who the market was at the time, even though they did a lot of research around this. Apple today actually doesn't do any research, or so they claim anyways. And I know that for a fact, actually, because I try to sell them all the time, because they're one of our customers, for other types of research, like syndicated, but on a custom basis, they don't do anything. But they did at one time. So this is a good example of market research run awry. Now the Zune, this is a product that probably nobody recognizes because they haven't sold very many. Now this is a product that actually had to go to market because Microsoft couldn't be left out of this space. But they went to market with a product that had a singular positioning element about connection and about social, which was a little bit ahead of its time, not communicated properly, and never really connected with the end users. Maybe not the fault of market research, but it's certainly the fault of marketers that this product didn't connect with their users. And I think the last example is probably close to your heart.
Yeah, so this is something that looks like a fire hydrant. You probably haven't seen it anywhere. This is a product that GE came up with. It's a residential water treatment unit. It was meant to sit outside your home and treat the entire water that goes into your home. We have really fairly good water quality in North America. In areas where they use groundwater, they have softeners. This was a highly priced unit for almost $7,000. They were trying to sell through Maytag. It just didn't fly. They just did not do their market research, and it lives as a like an antique in one of their offices I've seen, but it never sold. So that's an example of things gone wrong. So we just wanted to demonstrate to you that even large corporations, when they do all of this research and come up with new products, they can get it wrong. And it's important for you as entrepreneurs to think about those important elements as you get through your commercialization plans. So when you develop a new product, obviously there's various steps to it. You have a innovation phase, the idea phase. Maybe you're in that, obviously in that space. When you have a new product or some incremental change to an existing product, obviously the real next step is who is interested to buy it, who your customers are going to be. So you're going to do that research to understand that. Once you've done that, you need some kind of a prototype to show what you mean. Take your ideas to actually a physical thing to show someone what you're talking about. And then you test it with customers to see if they like it, what are the features, things like that, pricing, etc. And you analyze the information, and then you might come back to the development stage and make some changes. And eventually you launch. So you see all of this was the introduction phase that we had in the first product life cycle chart that we saw. So in these continual steps, what hopefully Dan and I will, in the next 30 minutes or so, give you all of the types of things that a market industry intelligence that you need to be thinking about, whether it's, is it something new or is someone else already doing this? Are there other companies already selling this? Where am I competing? You want to understand how big a pie you're going after. Is this like a $10 million market or a $100 million market? You want to understand that. And the different verticals that you want to get into, life sciences, or maybe it's clean tech or something else. And Dan will come in and he will specifically talk about the customer-oriented type of things that you might be research you might need to do to understand your positioning of your product. Okay, so let's get started with the first thing. So who am I competing with? These are some of the typical questions. Carrie mentioned that we have a market intelligence team here at Mars. We actually serve, we have about 7 analysts in the group, and we serve the entrepreneurs throughout the province, helping them answer some of these key questions. So typically they come in, they're wondering about, okay, maybe my technology is disruptive. I think it's disruptive. If it is, who am I replacing? Is it something? Is it just an incremental change from something existing? Who am I competing with? Maybe it's sometimes companies think they're competing with a GE and Siemens all of a sudden. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. It's because there might be another product line that's at a price point that you are immediately competing with versus a larger firm. So all of these questions are directed to our team, and we try our best to help them. I have some tips here on how you could actually do some research on your own to find some of this information. So let's address the first thing. This is something that you could do immediately, as it's available on the web. Just doing a patent analysis. It is hard, and even the analysts that I have in my team, we're not patent agents, but some preliminary analysis could be done by yourself. The 2 public domain databases, the US Patent and Trademark Office and the World Intellectual Property Office, these are public domain websites that you can do searches on to get a sense of, are there similar products that are out there, technologies out there, or molecules, whatever you're looking for. We do have access to proprietary paid databases that makes the searches a little easier, so we can help entrepreneurs with that. The other thing you have to think about is when you're comparing yourself to other technologies, where in the value chain you are. So is it something small that goes into a larger product? Which part of the A to Z are you filling? So that you're making right comparisons. And last but not least, don't disregard, there's tons of public information on, if there's a large enough company, there's product information and specifications. You'll be surprised how much of the information is on their website. If you go to trade shows, how much of it they share with the rest of the world on. Obviously, they're proud of their product. They put stuff out there saying how good they are in various things and the claims they're making. It gives you some window into, that's what their claim is. Maybe that's the target point for me to make something better or compete in. So those are some tips for you to look at. The next question that we get often, obviously, is we want to know how big the size of the market we're going after is. And this is a very dicey exercise. Has to be done carefully. You don't want to overestimate or underestimate. And it's tricky. So you want to be careful about how your potential market size may be today versus maybe something addressable in the long term. So the first year, second year, those kinds of things when you do financial planning for the company. So when we get these kinds of questions, we try to help them in many different ways. So obviously, Dan and I are from Frost & Sullivan, and day in and day out, what those analysts used to do is market sizing.
You work here now, I think.
That's correct. When we used to, I said. So there's a proprietary method that a lot of these companies have that they use to do market sizing and forecasting. So we can leverage some of that published data that is out there. What I would advise is that you look at more than one source. Remember that the people writing these reports are individuals like you and I, and the reports are only as good as the analysts. So therefore, it's important to have comparatives. So look at various sources of information. Always ask, as a customer, if you have bought something from somewhere, always ask the question, what are the definitions? Usually, the report should have some kind of definition of what is included in that and how the methodology of how they arrived at that number. If they don't have it, you have the prerogative as a customer to pick up the phone, call them and find out, speak to the analyst and get more detail, right? Mm-hmm. It's part of their customer service. So we do connect our entrepreneurs to analysts all the time so that they can have a chance to dwell deeper. You can only get so much on the page. So a lot of the information is in their head, and it's a good dialogue and discussion. So that's a good way of getting more information from them. So the second thing, there are published information that you can go by, but there is no harm in actually trying to do this on your own. However, cautionary notes on how to do it. So there are various ways. One is if the companies are in the public domain, obviously there's some amount of revenue information that you can find. If it's a particular product within that company, there might be some publications in their annual report or tax filings that you can say, okay, 20% of this company's revenues are from this product line. So you can estimate what that might be as a potential market size for that product, for that company. So that could be one way. So if you essentially gather up the revenues of all the different players in a space, it can give you an idea of, okay, the whole market for that product line looks like this. That's one way of doing it. The minute the companies are private, then obviously it becomes harder. There's not published information on it. It's difficult to gauge that. Then perhaps you might need to look at number of customers, depending on your sector. If it's in the healthcare space, maybe number of patients. If it's web space, number of potential customers that might be online for a particular type of a web. So you can use customer base as a way to get to market sizing. So regardless of what you use as methods, it's really important to not have oversized global numbers immediately. Try and look at them by geography, because there are so many variations in geography, price points, and customer base, etc., that it's important to look at them at the geography level, especially when you put investor pitches and decks together. Investors don't like huge global numbers. They like you to be more conservative and slice it down by geography as much as you can, and try and make realistic assumptions. The last one that I will talk about is the industry segment before I pass it on to Dan. I know that, just by show of hands, let's see, people are interested more in the life sciences space. Whoa, that's very little. Okay. How about in the IT, communications, and mobile type of space? A little bit more, obviously. And how about clean tech, environment, energy? A couple. The other people are in limbo land and not in any of these sectors, so they're not included in any of these. And so, regardless of which sector that you're in, today you might be thinking that you're selling into a particular space, but it might be relevant somewhere else. So, for example, there might be a product that you, maybe it's a PCR, it's a DNA testing device for something that you have come across, and it's used in maybe for infectious diseases, and it's maybe traditionally sold to labs. However, if it was a product that was, obviously made during the 9/11 times, that could be relevant for some other type of testing in the post office. That's not your traditional customer, but maybe they would be looking at it. So it really depends on where the investments are happening for you to direct your different product lines. One of the other things that to remember is the barriers to entry into certain sectors might be less. So that might be an advantage. So maybe the regulations are not as strict in certain segments, so you want to direct your attention there. Versus, and the sales cycles might be different from the government to private. So depending on the industry segment, you can change where you sell. Maybe that's your first customer before you move ahead. There's a lot of attention in clean tech space and in the water space. I don't know if you've heard a lot of similar to the feed-in tariff program in the clean tech area, there has been a legislation in the water area. So there's lots of attention in that in Ontario, which is increasing momentum of number of technologies that are coming on board in the water space. So looking at where investments are being made in different countries, different regions, or in sectors can help you direct your ideas as well. Okay, so that's all I had to say before I pass it on to
Well, let me just
Dan.
underscore something that you did mention, which was on the analyst community. I work for an analyst firm. Usha previously worked at an analyst firm. There are a lot of free sources available through analyst firms that you can track and follow. For example, look for an analyst who is covering your marketplace and follow them on Twitter. Can be a very good breadcrumb trail to what they're looking at, the kind of sources of information that they're gathering, because they're not gurus in the sense that they're not gathering this from thin air. They're actually following all sorts of different trails as well and gathering this information. So following them leads you usually to the source of their information. And if you can, back to the investor story side of things, if you can quote a respected analyst in the community, that just gives a little bit more oomph to your platform. Mm-hmm. And also a lot of these analysts, a lot of the big analyst firms allow their star analysts to operate blogs. Following those blogs is often another good source of information. And you know what? Just be bold and pick up the phone and call some of these guys every once in a while, because or ladies, because they'd be more than happy to take your call, at least to tell you to go away. But it doesn't hurt. I mean, I take calls all the time like that. I'm not on the analyst side of our business. I'm on the customs side, but I know that my colleagues on the analyst side take those kind of calls, and everybody likes their ego stroked, right? So you do a little bit of ego stroking, and you can probably get a little bit of free information. So I would offer up that kind of advice as well. And also visit Zoltar. He's a very good source of information to the analyst community. I don't know how many people here are from Ontario originally, but there's a place in Bala, Muskoka, called the Balacade, in which they had this automatron in a glass box. It wasn't Zoltar, actually. That's from the movie Big. But you put a quarter in, and it was actually a lady, it was a gypsy. I can't remember what the name of the game was, and she'd push out a little card and it had your fortune or something that would lead you to great success. But unfortunately, of course, the real world doesn't work that way unless you're 11 years old. What you actually need to do when you have an idea is to get an assessment as to how that is actually going to work and whether or not it actually has legs in the marketplace. And that's called concept testing, and it could be at all sorts of different stages in the development of your idea, your product, or your service. And I'm assuming that I'm not going to get commissioned with a $100,000 research project tonight. Is that correct? Or it would really make my month if we could. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about what the big corporations do, who put food on my table, and give you some ideas, some hints as to best practices that you can use, because there are some fundamental things that you need to be aware of, some rigor that needs to be attached to whatever you're doing. In the research community, there's no such thing as quick and dirty. In fact, those are bad words, because dirty implies that the data is no good, and quick means that you didn't apply the appropriate rigor to the methodology and to the process to begin with. So there are some things that we need to follow if we're going to try to do it efficiently in ourselves, or maybe our small circle of advisors or what have you, a small community of interest that we have around us. And I'll try to pepper my talk with some of those ideas. So back to this slide and what this is about. It's about understanding whether or not there's an actual marketplace for your idea. So the concept could be as simplistic as just an idea described on paper, usually called a concept statement. Or it could be more fully formed, like some kind of a prototype device that is actually working, because you want to assess usability in addition to discoverability and all sorts of other aspects of the product. It could be some kind of a schematic, a flash program that allows you to demonstrate the features, something that gets across to the potential end user, the potential target market, what this thing does and the benefits that it actually provides, without giving the whole story away, of course, because you're not trying to, in the research world, they say leading the witness. You're not trying to feed them the answers so that it just reflects back to you and you go, wow, look at that, everybody loves me. That's just not the case. In fact, everybody will say they love you, and that's called, press the button again, that's called a halo effect, because what happens with new ideas is, and everybody knows the old adage in advertising that new sells, right? New tide. There's always a new tide. Every 6 months there's a new tide, because new sells. Because there's a certain element of discovery and, I've got to try it, and challenge even around newness and around new things. And people really like new stuff, and they like to try it out and play with it. And marketers, of course, know that. And the problem when you're doing research is that often what you're picking up is that halo effect associated with the newness of the product, not necessarily the utility of the product itself. So a lot of products fail, back to that original slide, which is a bit of comic relief, but there's a lot of truism there as well. A lot of products fails because marketers fail to pick up on those ideas that it's a good idea, but it's not a great idea. And the target market maybe was the wrong market, and they really liked the idea behind it, but they weren't really willing to buy the thing. So the rigor that we need to attach to that then is to communicate the idea, the features, the benefits of it, without actually advertising it, if you will. So let's say we just have a simple concept statement of this product does this, 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 and this. So we're not trying to say this product solves world hunger and can put a man on the moon in 60 days. No, we're just trying to provide the benefits. It's a potential snack product that fills that void between lunch and dinner. It doesn't really solve world hunger. So we're trying to just portray what the basic features of the product are without actually selling it to the respondents. The sample that you would choose to do research, no matter how large or how small or how efficient, let's call it, to use a Toronto word, efficiencies, of how efficient the approach that you use, we need to test our product, our idea, with an audience that we think, and I'll talk about this in a second, we think resembles who the ultimate buyer of the product is going to be. So Usha's done a lot of legwork already for you in helping to understand who that target market is, and maybe you're going after a subsegment of it because a particular feature list that attracts this group of consumers or customers that you know are frustrated with this aspect of the product category. Whatever the case might be, you've isolated a specific target market. Those are the people you need to talk to in order to do your research. And it could be that you just assemble a group of advisors, a group of friends, you bring them over for dinner, you feed them a hot dog, and you say, here, try out this new scalpel or something. And then everybody tries it out, 3 people die, and you realize that the product is not actually going to be successful with that market. Something to do with alcohol, apparently. No, back to that.
Sorry.
Yeah. There are, Usha made, I think she mentioned a couple of things, but there are a lot of good resources available in the online world these days. There's online resources available for doing quantitative survey, and you can actually access either your own kind of made-up panel by emailing friends and family, or you can access a lot of paid-for panels rather inexpensively as well if you have the funds. But you have to be very careful with these sources of panelists because they can be biased and they can be pros. And it could be an 11-year-old child in the basement answering surveys because she gets 50 cents every survey that she responds to. That's true, okay? You have to be very careful with these things. You also have to be very careful with tools like SurveyMonkey is a big one out there. It's been around since the beginning of the internet. In fact, from the late 1990s, it really sort of caused a stir in the market research community what potential online tools could do in terms of eliminating my job. But as it turns out, that doesn't happen because you actually have to know how to design surveys, not just launch them into the ether. So there's a lot of good tools out there. We'll talk a little bit about them at the end, about how to source good best practices, about good research design. So if you're thinking about going that route, pay attention to good research design because it's the old adage, garbage in, garbage out, blah, blah, blah. It's very true. You can ask a question that is biased and it creates an answer that is not necessarily the answer you were looking for, and you may not actually be aware of that if it's not asked correctly. Now you can turn. All right, so then back to the issue of who is it that we want to talk to. One of the things that big corporations do a lot of is trying to isolate that key customer segment that they're going after. Because you can't launch that new Tide product because Tide already exists. The new Tide product is going to be some narrow niche that you recognize that there's a group of consumers out there need. You know, the little pills that you have on, I actually did this work, okay? The pills you get on sweaters and clothes and stuff like that. So we did some research that isolated a segment of consumers that were really very upset about that. And we presented that to P&G, and they were, very excited about it. And they developed some new products that prevented these pills from occurring. That's what they're actually called. I didn't know that until I did the research. But that's a very good example of what marketers are doing all the time. They're isolating bits and pieces of the marketplace, and they're targeting products and messages to those bits and pieces, because they can't be everything to everyone, right? And nor can you, so you need to isolate who that target is. And you can do it in all sorts of different ways. There's all sorts of data that you can use to segment a marketplace. It can be from the simplistic, which is just where are they, to the much more complex is what kind of attitudinal dispositions do they hold, what kind of need profiles do they have. But understanding who that is will help you to really further develop your product and everything around that product, the packaging, the pricing, the messaging around it. Everything is pinned to understanding who that end user is. When we were talking about today, yeah, you can go to the next bit there. When we were talking about today a couple weeks ago, I mean, one of the things that we were talking about, there's going to be a lot of healthcare or life sciences people here, so maybe the idea is that you've got a product that fits into a hospital environment, but then, as it turns out, it actually fits into a hospital environment in surgical rooms. So you need people with gloves are actually going to be opening the package, so that's going to inform the type of packaging that you're going to have then, and the type of usability that the product has. So those are the kind of considerations. Segmentation is not very easy if you do it right, but there are a lot of good data sources out there that can, Usha mentioned quite a few. There's a lot of good data sources out there that are readily available off the shelf. SIC codes, that's the standard industry classification codes. There's a lot of public domain information around census data, and there's a lot of building around census data, not just in Canada and the United States, but elsewhere as well, in which marketers have taken that data and reformulated it to come up with some profiles that have, funny names like guns and boats in Calgary, for example. Right? There's a group of consumers that are in Calgary. So marketers use those to direct mail to these types of individuals. That kind of information is usually readily available, and if you just scoop it up off websites, you can get some really strong information that leads you to either consumer group. Business to business, a little bit more difficult because it's a much more fragmented, disparate group of customers, but there are good sources of information out there for them as well. I guess the operative term here is rigor. So, tap a friendly researcher if you have one in your family or circle of advisors, or look to some other industry sources for good approaches to segmentation, to profiling customers. Next. So packaging and pricing, very tricky business pricing is, right? I mean, we want to price to win, but we want to price to win, right? We want to get the maximum amount we can out of a customer. And there's a lot of very sophisticated techniques that researchers use to isolate what is that to the penny price that I can charge and maximize either the margin I take or the volume I get, or some balance between those two usually. And the question is usually just as simple as that. Do I want to maximize for profitability or maximize for volume? And what it is that you want to do is up to you and your idea, of course, but the techniques are the same. You want to try to find out what people would be willing to pay for. You want to also isolate what features and benefits they are most willing to pay for, because that will give you some clues later on as to how to position the product. Whoa, I always thought it was this benefit that was going to be attractive, but it's in fact that everybody's gravitating to this benefit. That's what I should be talking up in my collateral materials or my PR efforts, or when I talk about the product in a sales pitch to a retailer or a distributor, I should be talking about that benefit, because that's the one that's going to be really resonate with the end user. The packaging side is a lot more difficult. There's a lot of good professional houses out there that do packaging work and advise on packaging. There's a lot of good online resources as well. Go to the next tick. Yep. But it's very difficult to research packaging, because then you get into whole different areas of the sciences around usability and discoverability, and these are very, very sophisticated areas. But there are some, like National Research Council, for example, does a lot of support in the audio community in offering up its facilities for testing various products for audiophiles. There's all sorts of other government resources that can be tapped for packaging and for usability. It used to be, when there was a Nortel, that they would even offer up their fantastic usability labs. I did a tremendous amount of usability experiments with what used to be called BNR, Bell Northern Research, way back when in the 1980s and 90s. And they had just fantastic usability labs in Canada. And they brought in customers all the time and watched them and observed them and tested them, how they pushed that button and how they answered that phone, and how they took a call if it was an attendant station. All these sorts of things went into the usability of a telephone. So the device that we see, and all the devices that we see, the devices that we have on us, have been tested, usually exhaustively, to come up with a design and a form factor that is best suited to the end user, and that's a very sophisticated science indeed. But there are resources out there to access it. But probably the most important issue for you guys is around the pricing side, and that's a little bit easier to tackle. But it requires, again, that rigor, right? I mean, you really need to approach it with an idea that, or a design idea that, research design idea, that will stand the test of consumers or customers' reluctance to pay anything for anything, right? Or how much would you be willing to pay for this great feature that you said you liked? Nothing? Okay, well, if you had to pay something for it, what would you pay? I don't know, next to nothing? So, there are techniques to get at that information. I mean, people will generally tell you what's called yay saying, what you want to hear rather than what they actually think as well. You should be aware of that. So that's why there's a lot of good research techniques, there's a lot of qualitative techniques to try to get underneath what people are actually saying and get to the root of it all. And there's a lot of good qualitative techniques, laddering and just emotional responses that you can use to try to get at what people are really thinking about that can of cat food. It's good cat food, isn't it? Well, but it's got liver in it, and the cat doesn't really like liver. Why doesn't your cat like liver? And then you get into a whole story, and then you find out that it's not the cat that doesn't like liver, it's the homemaker that doesn't like liver. Anyways, that's another story. That was another research project. Okay, so now you're at the gate, you're at the starting gate, and you have a product that's nicely packaged, perfectly priced, and now you want to message this thing to the world, and you want to communicate its ideal characteristics to that ideal target market that you've identified. This is a bit of an example. I have some advertising agency background in my career, and we did a lot of work around positioning, messaging for our clients, and I was working at Cassette at the time, clients like Bell and McDonald's, small marketing companies. And the things that we would do would be to what we called getting into the glass vault, which was just to isolate everybody and come up with all sorts of ideas around what this product is all about and what we want to say about it, and then look at all the other research that we had and then generate all sorts of hypotheses and then go out and test these. We'd build out what are called ripomatics, which are taking bits and pieces of other commercials and putting them all together, so you've got one that looks kind of like the commercial idea that we have, and then you go test that, and then you go out and do some storyboarding and you test that, and of course you can't do all of that unless you're Bell or McDonald's or BMO. So what you want to try to do is, through this whole process, is that you've been getting information about what is it that is attracting people, what are the key benefits that I need to communicate to people, what's really resonating with them, and there it is, there's your core message right there. But you have to reflect that against what your competitors are doing as well. Is it a copycat message? Is it complementary? Is it contrary to what the category actually speaks to itself? So, if you have a fast food product, you don't want to talk about something that's, slow and just like mother would cook on Sunday afternoon. It's a fast food idea. I mean, that just doesn't work. It's contrary to what the product category is all about. So it has to build on the product category and everything that's in that equity platform already, but it has to offer something new. Has to differentiate itself from the competitive set. And you've developed that understanding. Just click there. And again, I mean, the key issues here are really understanding those purchase drivers, and then using some of the resources that now you've developed and developing some communication testing. Now here, it's actually a lot easier to do small-scale communication testing, say with a circle of advisors or circle of family and friends or a circle of acquaintances, and stay kind of arm's length from all this. Whenever I talk about bringing in a small circle of individuals in your sphere of influence to help you with some research projects, you have to stay arm's length from it. Maybe elect somebody else that you're partnering with to do some of the facilitation of a small-scale qualitative focus group, for example, because you're too close to it. And the things you say actually can bias the response from individuals. Plus, if you know some of those people that you're doing some research with because they're in your circle of family and friends, they don't want to hurt your feelings, right? I mean, they're not going to say, this product really sucks. So you want to kind of step back from it and not even be in the same room. That's why if you've ever been to a focus group, you've seen that either in the front side or the back side that there's a partition. It's a one-way viewing mirror between the observers and the respondents. And there's a reason for that, because the marketers would kill the respondents because the respondents are talking terrible about their ad campaign or about their product idea. And in the back room, of course, they're all drinking champagne and eating steak dinners, and the 1% in the back room, of course. So I think that's it. So we're into messaging, communications. Obviously, the choice of communication platform will be dependent on your market, your budget, et cetera. But that will naturally fall out of an understanding of who your target audience is, who those segments are that you're talking to, because you will understand what source of information they are using to make a purchase decision, how they're accessing information about new product ideas, et cetera. So those are the platforms that you want to use to communicate to those individuals.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. So lastly, I know this is a lot of information in a short period of time, but essentially what we wanted to convey to you was that regardless of what sector you're in, what space you're in, it is really key, really important to understand your customer, the market you're going after, the industry you're going after, because all the passion that you have about your product has to also come in the research that you do about your product, so that you're not setting yourself up for any failure. I love this picture of a boombox in a shoe, which you obviously don't see anymore or see at all, because it wasn't obviously thought through very well. So whether you make a decision of, okay, yes, I'm going to go ahead with this, or no, you need to make that decision with sound information. So a couple of things that we wanted to mention. It is very key in this information age to be really on top of your game. It's not a rat race, but if you have made a decision to be an entrepreneur, and you have committed yourself to have this technology product, whatever, come into the marketplace, and you've dedicated yourself, then there are some things that you need to do on an ongoing basis to be on top of things. These are no-brainers, but sometimes it just falls on the wayside. One is industry events. There are certain industries where you've got to show up at every trade show or industry event to mingle with other people who are in that space. It's tremendously valuable because you'll see your competitors there, future competitors may be there. You will get to speak to other customers. You're getting so much of all of this customer information. You could be getting that live by just walking that trade show and speaking to individuals in that place. The other, simple things, I know we are just bombarded with information these days, but there are some key journals or newsletters or trade magazines that you should be subscribing to and reading religiously online, whatever it is. So make that commitment to do that. The other, we talked about analysts. Dan said, yes, you can pick up the phone and talk to analysts. A lot of them have their own blogs. You can actually, the different vendors that publish in the market research space, you don't need a subscription to see what type of information is being published,
right,
or to see who's writing what. So you can go on to these websites and search and see who's writing what.
They usually give you a synopsis of the topic.
Exactly. So you can track, don't stalk them, but track the blogs that these people are writing, and then send them press releases. We have encouraged our entrepreneurs to send press releases of various new things that's going on in the company to the analysts. They might choose to write about you. They might choose to publish about.
Of course, if you contact Frost & Sullivan, you'll receive a never-ending stream of sales messages offering you our services. Don't give us your real email address.
Yes, fake
There's
it.
a clue.
So that's a way to keep in touch. Like Dan said, they do speak with a lot of people all day long who are in that space, and you don't have that time, or you or I don't have that time or luxury. So tap into their knowledge in that way. And then, did you want to comment on the last one?
Yeah, this first one here, the MRIA, that's the Canadian Association of Market Research Professionals. I'm a member of it, have been all my career. The vast majority of market research professionals in Canada are a member of this association, the number of about 2,000 individuals. They have a lot of good resources online, MRA whatever the French equivalent of MRIA is, .com, and just Google MRIA. And they also have, for those students in the room, they also have very attractive student rates, and they often have some free events as well. You can go in there and go, hey, I'm doing some packaging research, how would you ask this question, that kind of thing. just networking with these individuals. It just gives you access to a skill set that is just not readily available if you don't have the money to pay for it, because it is, it's a very costly prospect to do very large-scale market research. And then there's other global, SMR is probably one of the leading organizations around the world. It's a European organization, but it's very much a leading light. MRA is the UK-based equivalent, also a lot of good free resources there. They have a lot of published material online as well. A lot of it's technique-based rather than information-based, so if you're looking for specific techniques, they have a lot of book reviews if you're looking for access to various publications, as does the MRIA. And you could even tap MRIA, the board of directors, which is made up of community members, professional researchers, for their favorite books. If you follow any of these organizations through LinkedIn, you can always subscribe that way, and there's a number of different user groups on LinkedIn that specialize in market research as well, and there's often lots of good conversations that begin at this kind of level, which is, I'm doing this, how would I do that? And then all the researchers kind of pile on, trying to outdo each other with advice and whatnot. So there's lots of good material out there. It's a tsunami sometimes, for sure. You have to pick and choose, I think.
Be careful where the information that you're choosing are from some credible sources, so that you know that you can rely on them. That's all we had to share with you this evening, and we're happy to answer any questions if you had any. And that's it. Have a good evening.
And what are you wearing? Who are you wearing tonight, Usha?
Hi there. I had a question.
Sorry.
If you have a question, could you just go to the mic just for the webcasting? It's easier for them to hear. Yeah, thanks. We'll start over here.
Hi, I just wondered, what do you think about these companies that are online, like WagJag, FabFind, Fab, Outlook, all these purchasing sites? What do you think the marketing idea behind so many of those coming up? And if you were looking at those particular sites, what rationale do you think they would use of just keep making more purchasing sites, like as far as looking at a market share or what have you?
You're talking about research purchasing?
Like WagJag, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so they're like consolidators of research. I mean, it's just another sales avenue. I mean, Frost & Sullivan probably that's my firm, probably sells a couple $100,000 worth of that kind of research a year, pennies a pop. So they might sell a chart out of one of our reports for $5, for example. It's just another way to access information. It's back to checking the credibility of the original source rather than the credibility of the distributor themselves.
So are you talking about aggregators of information?
What I'm saying is that if you had any thoughts on the rationale of how many, there are so many of these companies coming online now, and everyone just keeps making another one and another one. Is it like, I can't really see what's the rationale of all these companies making another company.
They're very cost efficient to run, and it's all gravy once you've set it up, because you're distributing, you're aggregating other people's work. Frost & Sullivan did all the work and put the investment into preparing these reports, or Gartner or Forrester. All you're doing is reselling it. It's pretty easy.
There's no cost for them to
Any industry has these kind of aggregators now. There's a company called Global Spec. I did some research for them, in fact, on the same idea, which is, here's some products that we have based on search, because what they're selling is search results on their aggregation site, right?
Okay.
So you're a company that builds girders for bridges, and this is literally the industrial type companies they have, and you buy time or you buy space on this website, and people get access to your brochures, and they can ask you for quotes and bids and things like that, and you can use that as lead generation tools, and they become incredibly sophisticated, and they become this incredible wealth of information, and they're in it to make money off you, the buyer, in addition to the seller.
Data collection.
Yeah, and they're just collecting data, yeah.
Got it.
Over here.
I need that deep pilling product from Tide. But beyond that, you talked about sources that we could go to for market research, like big market research organizations. Can you think of one in particular that deals with best practices for qualitative research, not numerical research?
Yeah, I mean, qualitative research tends to be a boutique-ish game, just simply because of the lifestyle of the individual practitioners. You're usually out at night doing focus groups with consumers. And because it's more lucrative for the good moderators to earn a living working out of their home office rather than working for a big market research company. So mostly they're boutique operations. The big giant market research companies do qualitative research, but not as well as the boutique operators. There's, if you go to the MRIA site, they have a qualitative research, what do they call it, specialty body, for the lack of the proper term. And they can direct you to a directory, which I believe is online and free, of market research companies in the Toronto area that specialize in qualitative research. And you will find mostly that they're individual practitioners. And that gives you more access to those individual practitioners. You can call them up and say, hey, I've got this idea, and how do you think I should handle it? And I mean, obviously they're in the game to make money as well, but that would be the best source. MRIA, they have the qualitative research body as one of their groups within the organization, and then they have a directory of all the qualitative research practitioners in Canada.
But it's mostly the big corporations outsource to these little guys, right?
A lot of times they do. I mean, big corporations will house professional qualitative researchers, but they're not A-listers typically. Like,
They're kind of sucky.
kinda. Like, I do qualitative research, but I'm a C-lister in qualitative research. A-lister in quantitative, but C on qualitative.
Thank you. Over here.
Thank you for your talk. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about inbound marketing and just strategies around what that concept involved. Inbound marketing. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Inbound marketing?
Yeah, instead of typically, if you have a business and you're trying to market or penetrate the market, you'd be doing stuff outward.
Right.
And I'm talking about stuff that you can do that would attract people towards you rather than that. I don't know if you've heard of that concept before, inbound marketing. Yeah.
Like the chicken ranch. It's in Nevada, so never mind.
Over somebody's head.
In our
Like a casino. How's that?
in our sales lecture, which is in April, I think we're going to have both B2B sales and consumer marketing, which will cover some of that stuff. I think it's maybe a bit more of that lecture.
Okay.
Maybe.
All right.
Yeah. I think the approaches are very similar. I mean, you're trying to establish a message in the marketplace. In this particular case, you're not pushing the message, you're trying to pull with that message.
Right.
Is that the idea?
Right.
Yeah. So it's the same idea, it's just you're trying to catch flies rather than go out with a fly swatter and hunt them down.
I don't think it alters the effort or the messaging
No.
that you put into it.
No,
In
it's
either
a different
way.
approach, different tactics, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Back here.
Hi, I have a question about, follow up to the question about qualitative data analysis. And I was just wondering if you mentioned that you have some experience with doing qualitative research. It appears to be a very inductive process. So
Right.
do you have any methodologies that you use, particularly when trying to discover some of the outliers that exist within the business context, like?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of methodologies. It's very difficult to extract meaningful data from individuals for a lot of reasons. The yay saying that I talked about before, the tendency for people to tell you what they think you want to hear rather than what you really should be saying. It's like being a parent, right? So there's techniques like laddering, for example, in which you start at a low level of, you buy a product because it tastes good. Then you start laddering up into what really is driving that purchase decision. Because there's an emotional context regardless what the product category is, there is an emotional context you bring to purchases and to consumption all the time. Everybody does. I don't care what you're purchasing. If you're buying a girder for a bridge, there's an emotional contact with that. Maybe it's a relationship that you have with the organization. There's a safety aspect to it. You believe the steel in that girder is safe just because of this, this, and this. So you have this notion in your mind that's not borne out by any scientific data. You have a connection to a particular brand. You have an emotional connection to the things that you wear on yourself as a badge. So you're trying to get into that, what really resonates, what really drives a purchase, because that's the most powerful thing for marketers, because we don't want to sell new Tide that gets those pills away. What we're trying to sell you is the idea that if you walk out in public with those pills on you, that's bad. You're not going to get a date. You're not going to get laid tonight. I mean, you're not even going out for dinner. And it's just bad news. So it's the emotional content. Now, you just want to see me. I got to buy that product. I just can't, I love this sweater. I just got to get these pills off.
So do you know any researchers that practice ethnography, like in...
Ethnography?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of good researchers. A lot of the big houses have ethnographic research groups. Probably the most famous individual in the Canadian context, whose name, of course, escapes me at this moment, but he worked for the Royal Ontario Museum. He's written a number of books. He really kind of championed, in the Canadian context, ethnographic research. But a good source of ethnographic research would be the UK. In the UK, researchers have a long history of being very much observers of consumer behavior, going into the house and looking into the pantry and seeing what's on the shelf, and sitting down for a meal with the family and listening to the crosstalk and how they share the Campbell's soup and what their reaction to Campbell's soup being served tonight instead of Mom's homemade soup is, and all those sorts of things. That's ethnographic research, just observation of kind of the Jerry Seinfeld of research, just observation.
Thank you.
All these references that are not getting any.
Are any questions on
Yeah,
that?
we'll take the last two questions and then we'll wrap it up. Thanks.
Okay, so once you have like primary data and you have those like data points that you can, what are some best practices or resources that we can use to sort of analyze that and get some good insights?
Well, let's see. There's a lot of good charting resources online, and there's certainly no shortage of good advice. I mean, I would, there's some interesting places to start with. I don't know how academic you'd want to get into it, but there's some obviously good best practices associated with the visual display of information. What you're trying to achieve is getting across what the message from the data is. You're not trying to pretty it up. You're not trying to disguise it in any way, like, for example, using 3 dimensions on a bar chart. Okay, what's the third dimension mean? Nothing, but it looks good. Okay, well, that's a data point then. Keep it out. Keeping it simple, focusing on the data, keeping the colors simple, no pretty pictures embedded in a pie chart. Keep the pie chart together, don't explode them. Keep it simple, have the data labeled nicely. Those are the kind of best principles that any market researcher would use. There's some very good, very basic resources. Again, I would encourage you to go to the Canadian Research Society site, the MRIA, good resources, kind of research 101 stuff to higher levels. And they've got actually some good courses too around from basic to more advanced analytics, because once you get into larger data sets, then there's all sorts of wonderful ways you can spin that data and make it tell tales. And that's what good market researchers do, is they take that data set and they make it sing, right? They really do something with it. Some kind of multivariate analysis to really make the thing come alive. If you're trying to deliver a message, one of the most effective ways to do it is to do it like a storyboard, and then have the data underlying it to support the storyboard. So it's, the idea, I did a presentation today, it was on trucks, of all things, trucks. Trucks in Brazil, as a matter of fact. So we had this trucker from Brazil in the background, breaking my rule about no pictures, but it was all text on top of it. And we just layered in these data points on top of it that was trying to tell our tale about what makes this guy tick and why we should be selling our engines to this guy and how we should be positioning the engine to get his attention. And then the data behind it tells, here's the proof. 30% said this, and 60% said that, and 72% didn't say that. That's pretty boring stuff, right? So we're just trying to storyboard it, get the actual story that you're trying to create, and then have the data underline that rather than just reams and reams of data. I don't know if that helps.
Last question from this side.
Hi, question for Dan on product concept test. Can you give me some guideline to design a meaningful product concept test, especially to capture also the emotional contents?
Okay, is this a consumer or business-to-business product?
Two-side model. Payer is the B2B, end user consumer.
Got it. Okay. So you want to get the emotional context from the consumer because the payer wants to understand that if they're not providing this service or product, they're going to be breaking the hearts of little children.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's two different approaches you need to take. One is a very pragmatic, rational approach with the payer because the payer has a different set of needs and requirements. They want an efficient and effective product based on their terms. So you have to prove out those characteristics. So for them, it's gearing up a product test that establishes that kind of efficacy, which is, see, you use less of it. For the consumer, it's about things that are frustrating with the current product category. It's painful, it's intrusive, it's cumbersome, whatever the case might be. I did some work for a product in the diabetes space, which was connected to the smartphones. You have an app on your iPhone, and then you can have this device. Now it's all, all these great things, painless and all that kind of stuff. And that was it. That was for the NHS, which is the UK's payer system. That's all they needed to hear. They knew that the product was great because it met their price point. It was efficient. And then they heard from the end user that it's something they would actually use. So therefore, it helped the healthcare system because it would encourage use of the diagnostic tool.
In this case, should it be two separate product sort of?
See, I would start from the end user always. It's a
Yeah.
source material, right?
Yes, so first stage is to test the concept with the end users.
Yeah,
Get the data, get the response,
right.
and then create a second stage demo whatsoever to test with the payer.
Yeah, that's right. Whenever P&G goes out and does research on Tide, you know who the audience for that research is? Walmart. That's their customer. Their customer isn't you. Their customer is Walmart and Loblaws, Zellers, if they still exist. They need the shelf space for that new Tide product. So they gather information from you about why you like that new Tide product, and they take that to Walmart and they say, open up a little bit of shelf space there, we got a winner. And Walmart says, yeah, you're right, you do have a winner. It's going to cost you $300 million for that shelf space, but yes, go ahead. So that's how they work it, and that's how you should work it. You go to the end user first, understand that it's a winning idea, and then you go to the payer in your case.
So focus basically on the end user's frustration.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Or need.
Yeah, or need, yeah.
Or their gaping neck wound, whatever's what they need the most. So thanks so much, Dan and Usha, for that great presentation. We loved hearing you in tandem.